Welcome to Rare Connection, the podcast where we bridge the gap between rare disease patients, educate medical professionals, and raise awareness for the 95% of rare conditions that still lack FDA-approved treatments. I'm your host, Joanna. Before we dive in today, I want to remind our listeners that the information shared in this podcast is intended for educational purposes only. And please consult a medical professional before making any decisions based on what you hear in today's episode. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome a very special guest, Patrick James Lynch. Patrick is an award-winning filmmaker, health advocate, and founder of Believe Limited, a company dedicated to creating impactful content around bleeding disorders. Living with hemophilia himself, Patrick has turned his personal experience into a powerful platform for advocacy, dedicating his work to the memory of his late brother, Adam, a retired news anchor from for WTAE TV in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who passed away at the age of 89. Patrick's contributions to rare disease community have been widely recognized. He was honored with the 2020 Rare Impact Award from the National Organization for Rare Diseases, or NORD, received the Meritorious Service Award in 2014, and he has been a keynote speaker for the World Federation of Hemophilia conferences in 2016 and 2018, among other accolades. As we engage in this important conversation, I kindly ask that we keep politics out of the comments. Let's focus on the stories, experiences, information, and that unite us in our shared mission to support the rare disease community.
Patrick, can you, for those who don't know, explain what hemophilia is and the differences between the different types of them?
Certainly. Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Joanna. Greatly appreciate that. Hemophilia is, like so many rare diseases, the absence of a certain protein. In this case, it's a protein that's involved in the coagulation cascade or the clotting cascade, which is responsible for ultimately helping us create blood clots to seal up anytime a blood vessel is burst. So we create durable, sustaining blood clots via the coagulation cascade. But if you're missing one of the many proteins that participates in that process, it may result in a bleeding disorder. So in my case, I'm missing a protein called the factor VIII protein. That means that my coagulation cascade does not function appropriately. And so when my blood vessels burst without treatment, I don't have the natural ability to heal those in a reasonable amount of time. People that have hemophilia B, that's missing a factor IX protein. There are people who are missing the factor X protein, the factor I protein, the factor VII protein, von Willebrand factor. And all of these proteins work as part of this cascade, can result in a bleeding disorder. Hemophilia tends to be the one that, if people have heard of one, a rare one, it's that. Though von Willebrand disease is actually the most common bleeding disorder. But I have severe hemophilia A.
Mm-hmm. So did your brother also have hemophilia?
He did. He was born 2.5 years later, and he also had severe hemophilia A. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and notice it's genetic, so it's from what I've read, it's about a 25% chance.
Yeah, so it's X-linked.
You can have siblings with
My
it?
mother was a carrier, and so she had one affected X and one unaffected X. And so my brother and I each had a basically 50-50 coin flip of whether or not we'd get her affected X or the unaffected, and we both got the affected one, so we were both born with severe hemophilia A.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Can you share your what was like growing up with hemophilia A as a child, and your and how it influenced your path of into filmmaking and advocacy?
Yeah, growing up with hemophilia was complicated. I grew up in the mid to late 80s, 90s, and early aughts. Treatment and strategies to manage hemophilia were not where they are today. People with hemophilia A have a number of treatment options that are safe, efficacious, and durable. When I was born, we were still experiencing the effects of pathogens like HIV, hepatitis C, HCV, and other pathogens in the blood supply, which affected treatment products that were created based on blood and plasma donations. So actually 90% of people with severe hemophilia like me in the 1980s, 90% contracted either HIV or hepatitis C. And the vast majority of those people have since passed as a result of one or both of those. I did contract hepatitis C, though I'm one of the 10% of people who naturally clear it. So I benefited from that luck of the lottery. In addition to those pieces of my story, I developed an immune response to the medication, what we would commonly refer to as inhibitors. So for the better part of 7 years, I essentially wasn't able to take the therapy that was available because my body was rejecting it. And so I had to take alternatives that were not as efficacious, not as durable, had to be taken much more frequently with IVs, intravenous injections. I missed a lot of school. I experienced a lot of internal bleeding, a lot of isolation. Of course, none of us have rare diseases in a vacuum either. My parents split up when I was quite young and got divorced. We moved a few times, different schools, a grandmother who's helping out in spite of her own issues with post-polio syndrome. So life was complicated, and it's gotten easy from a hemophilia perspective. It's gotten easier and easier. I'm 38 now. I'd say, the last 18, 19 years have been much, much healthier than the first 18, 19. And for families being born into hemophilia today, I'm happy to say we're in a much better treatment and management landscape, and with a lot of clinical trial and drug discovery work being done on what will hopefully eventually be a cure.
Mm-hmm. So,
and you asked about how it influenced the work. So,
right.
Interestingly, when I found theater before I found filmmaking, and I found filmmaking before I found advocacy. Theater for me became my sport as an older teen in high school. For a kid who only ever wanted to be playing basketball and involved in athletics, but had a condition that wouldn't allow that, when I sort of happenstancely wound up in a local community theater musical, I realized it had all these things I had been looking for in sports. It was this extracurricular activity. You're working with a team. Everybody's got a different role, but there's a common goal. You got to show up to, we call them rehearsals instead of practices. We call them shows instead of games. We call it intermission instead of halftime. And there's also a lot more women involved in music theater than on the basketball team. So I was like, I think I found something here. It also became an area where I could express myself. And I didn't realize at the time how much I needed that. As a kid who grew up with an assortment of challenges and traumas, it provided me with this outlet, which is why now Believe Limited does all sorts of arts-related workshops and art as therapy symposiums for rare disease communities around the U.S. because of, in part, my personal experience with how transformative that was. So for me, the arts was what was bringing me away from hemophilia and rare disease and all this health stuff. But then when my brother passed away just before I graduated college, and I realized that his complacency with self-care and his never fully identifying as somebody that had this life-threatening chronic disease, when I realized that those were the things that ultimately did him in, that it wasn't a lack of drug development or medicine, it wasn't a lack of access, it wasn't a lack of affordability. He had the very medicine he needed 2.5 feet underneath his bed in a duffel bag, but it wasn't in his system. He hadn't been taking it on the regimen as prescribed because he had not developed that sense of identity of someone who actually had a life-threatening chronic disorder. He almost grew up a little too healthy. So when he was in college, it was too easy to forget, shrug off the self-care, and unfortunately for him, he suffered the worst-case scenario. So my aha moment from that traumatic event was that medicine is not enough. We need to be doing more to make sure young people especially are identifying with their condition so that they are owning the self-care principles and the management tenets that will keep them healthy, safe, and alive, frankly. That was what gave way to starting Believe Limited with this entertainment to affect change mission, creating funny comical web series and theatrical live events, story-driven podcasting, and on and on and on, to use story and entertainment as a vehicle for engagement, education, and empowerment. And it's directly as a result of what wasn't happening at the time that I lost my brother back in 2007.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the workshops. There's a lot of comedy I know does that, but I haven't seen it. You have a different interest, different take on the entertainment industry also, because I've never seen anybody mention that before related to sports that way. Let's see. You've dedicated most of your work to your late brother, Adam. How has his memory shaped your approach to advocacy and storytelling?
I'd say Adam's memory shaped my approach to advocacy and storytelling in that it helped me realize Adam's life taught me, as I said before, that medicine isn't enough, that a young person especially needs to own what their condition is and what they need to do to take care of themselves. And if we as leaders only ever push out highly didactic, highly medical, highly uncreative materials to engage a young person, we're never going to do it effectively. We're certainly not going to do it optimally in this era of personalized health and optimized health. So Adam's story is what led me to realize, okay, in order to advocate effectively, in order to engage people effectively, we need to be using one of the most powerful tools we have, and that is the tool of storytelling. It's the tool of entertainment. If we can make people laugh, we can make people listen. So I credit his life experience with the very underpinnings of how Believe Limited first got started back in 2011.
What were some of the most significant challenges you faced due to your condition, and how have you transformed these challenges into opportunities for advocacy?
Good question. So I'd say there's 3 big challenges that come to mind that have impacted my life and ultimately led to advocacy. The first I talked about growing up was challenging. And I've had a lot of isolation, feeling different than, feeling othered, feeling removed from my peers. So when I found theater and I found the arts and I found a community of people that I felt like I belonged to, I was inclined to fight to participate in that and take that really seriously and try to be a great contributor in that arena, because for so long I felt isolated, different, like there wasn't a place for me. So that challenge led to me embracing a work ethic and a team-oriented point of view when I found theater and collaborative storytelling that has served me really well. I mentioned my brother, and his death was a major challenge related to maybe not but my brother's hemophilia, and the grief associated with that, survivor's guilt associated with that, blame and wondering what could I have done differently as his older brother to maybe have prevented that. I've had to think deeply about what his experience means in my life and how to make the most of it, and I've tried to do that through the work at Believe Limited. And then the final challenge that comes to mind had to do with my transitioning as a young adult from one state to another, getting on different health insurance, finding new doctors, finding a new pharmacy, all of that transition-related stuff that comes when you're managing a rare disease. I was very well cared for in New York, where I was born and grew up. But when I moved to California, I had a bunch of issues, and I tried to do all the right things. I tried to consult all the right people. I tried to call all the right phone numbers. But I ran into a lot of issues with ultimately getting my medication, to a point where it got a little scary. Like, I'm going to run out, and without this medication, this is a life-threatening disease. Like, I need this. So I had my back against the wall and had to use my standing in the community to start advocating publicly and using social media, because that was the best way to get the attention of the higher-ups at my pharmacy and my healthcare providers. And it was effective. I wrote a piece that was very well supported about my experience. It got a lot of traction, and within a few days it led to phone calls with decision makers at the various places, an in-person meeting within a few weeks, and my situation from there changed. Some policy at these places changed, and I still hear about how people are benefiting. So that's also an example of how, when I was advocating for myself in this case, it had a ripple effect on how other people with hemophilia in the future would be treated by this provider, by this insurance company. So those are the three big challenges that come to mind and how they led to advocacy.
What inspired you to found the Believe Limited, and how do you see your work there making an impact on the bleeding disorder community?
Believe Limited was born out of a passion to tell stories that aren't often told, stories that resonate with those who are affected by, at first, hemophilia and bleeding disorders, but now all sorts of rare and chronic conditions, and to do so in ways that allow community to gather and deepen their engagement with their community, with information about their disease state, with the latest treatment and strategy options. So it's not just storytelling for the sake of storytelling, it's storytelling to bring people together. And as someone that has hemophilia, I have experienced firsthand the challenges, the misconceptions, the stigmas that surround the condition. And I've wanted to use my skills in filmmaking and media to shed light on the realities of not just people with hemophilia, but people with all sorts of rare diseases. They affect 1 in 10 people, as we know. The term rare is almost a bit of a misnomer, because the totality of us affected by rare diseases is over 30 million. And those are just the patients alone in the United States. So I think it's extremely important that we normalize what it means to have, care for, live with a rare disease. And through Believe work, we try to create a sense of belonging, provide valuable information, and ultimately drive awareness, advocacy, and community building.
See, how did you come up with the name for the company?
Believe Limited was a name that my co-founder Ryan Gielen and I played with quite a lot when we were first partnering up. We really liked believe as the lead word, and limited was in the choices for the second word. We played with all these other things, but ultimately there was something really satisfying to us about believe. It's aspirational, it's hopeful, it's forward-looking, it's optimistic, but limited. As service providers and producers, everything is always limited to the scope, the budget, the deliverables, the realities of the project. It's not just about the big, hopeful, optimistic believe part. There's the true limitations that come with actually executing work and getting it done and delivered. And we're also working in complex chronic and rare disease where limitations are a part of everyday life. Doesn't mean we can't believe. It doesn't mean we can't live aspirationally and optimistically, but it means that part of our reality every day includes limitation. So the more we played with what else, believe this, believe that, we just kept coming back to believe limited. I think that was at the end of 2012, and we've never looked back.
Let's see. For your work, the 2020 Rare Impact Award. How do these recognitions? What do these recognitions mean to you, and how have they influenced your work moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. The 2020 Rare Impact Award from NORD is a tremendous honor. NORD is obviously a preeminent organization for people with rare diseases, not just in the U.S., but from a global perspective. And the other awards and recognitions and honors, the most important part of them to me is that they expand awareness of the work. So we have a few of our projects that are currently nominated for various awards. And the first thing that I'm aware of when I hear about those nominations is that more people are going to hear about these projects. More people are going to see these films. More people are going to look into these live events. That means the work is growing. It's impacting more people. It's touching more people. We're increasing awareness. We're increasing education. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is they're very validating because it lets other potential partners, funders, colleagues in a given project or initiative, it gives them a little comfort if we can point to things we've done before that have, received a Webby Award or a NORD Award or a Fierce Pharma Award, or we've had this film that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Those things matter. It signals to people we're trying to build something new with that we know what we're doing, quite frankly. So anytime we get these kind of honors, yes, victory, we're raising more awareness, we're exposing more people to these stories, these disease states, these human beings. And then secondarily, the validation means we'll probably get more opportunities to continue doing this in the future.
At Federation for Hemophilia conferences, what key messages do you aim to convey in these speaking engagements?
So I've done a fair amount of speaking over the past 12 or 14 years. For the World Federation of Hemophilia and their World Congress, or for any global audience that I'm speaking to, my key message is usually that treatment is for all. If there are treatments available that can sustain or improve the lives of people with any rare disease, every person with that rare disease around the world has a humanistic right to access that medication. Now, what that actually means and how that's actually implemented is far more complex than I would like for it to be. But even if we come back to hemophilia, where here in the United States, if you have severe hemophilia, less than 1% of clotting factor protein like I do, for 3 decades, there have been life-sustaining, life-enhancing therapies that have enabled people with hemophilia to live a relatively, quote-unquote, normal life. But still in 2024, only about a quarter of the people with severe hemophilia worldwide have access to any of these therapies. About 70 to 75% of the globe still does not have access. They are still living in a reality that was true in the U.S. 80, 90 years ago, where if you got a diagnosis of severe hemophilia, chances are you would not see past 20 years old. That is still true in most of the world. And at the same time, we've had medications that can change that reality for decades. So globally, there is a great amount of inequity, and healthcare systems and culture and economics. There are all sorts of forces that complicate the goal of getting treatment to every patient around the world who can benefit from it, which of course suggests you've diagnosed the patient in the first place. And diagnosis with all rare diseases, but again, I'll bring it back to my own of hemophilia, diagnosis continues to be a major challenge from a global perspective. And if we're not diagnosing patients, we don't know what the true needs are, and it's even harder to lobby governments and health officials about what they should be doing for their people, again, if we have not identified who of those people have, in this case, hemophilia. So my key messages, anytime I'm given a global platform, are that we do what we can from our respective positions, the respective stakeholders do what they can to try to make treatment for all an equitable reality for people with rare diseases around the world.
So, while your work is deeply rooted in bleeding disorders, do you, because you kind of touched on this before, but do you see potential for your advocacy extending to other diseases?
I do, and I'm proud to be able to say that each year for the last 5 or 6 years now, if we just looked at the communities that Believe Limited works in as a pie chart, the amount of that work that takes place in hemophilia and bleeding disorders shrinks every year as we add more and more rare disease communities and chronic disease communities and complex health conditions to the communities that we serve. So as someone with hemophilia, as the father of a young girl with hemophilia, I will always be a hemophilia advocate. Bleeding disorders will always matter to me. But my hope is that as Believe Limited continues to grow, we continue to grow in more and more spaces beyond hemophilia, because something that's become abundantly clear to me over the course of 12 years and the dozens and dozens of communities we have worked in and the couple of hundred projects that we have executed have taught me is that there's so much more that, you know, Joanna, if you and I kind of just went through our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, I know we would find so many more commonalities than differences as it relates to managing and living with a rare disease. There's so much more that unites the experience of living with a rare disease amongst the different communities than there are differences between them. Yes, the treatments we need are different. Yes, the symptomatic manifestation of them different. But the lived experience of having these, the way they change our lives in every way, shape, and form, the way we interact with our families, our workplaces, our dreams, our goals, our aspirations, our finances, our time, our ability to travel and move, everything is impacted by a rare disease. So my hope is that we continue moving in this direction where Believe is operating in as many communities as we possibly can.
Some of the upcoming projects you're most excited about, how do you plan to continue to advocate for the bleeding disorders community and beyond?
Yeah, great question. So some upcoming projects that I'm excited about. There's a documentary that Believe Limited's been working on for many, many years about Ryan White, who became the de facto poster child for HIV and AIDS in the later half of the 1980s. We've been doing this documentary on his life and impact in partnership with his mother for many years, and it is now nearly finished, barring one big celebrity interview that we are working on and believe we will get, and the timely and costly process of polishing and licensing and scoring and color correcting and sound mixing and all those wonderful post-production elements. But the documentary itself, the bones of it are there. So I'm excited and hopeful that in the next 12 months we will finish that project and be pushing that out into the world. So I'm very excited about that. We also learned just earlier this week at the time we're recording that My Beautiful Stutter, a feature documentary that we produced and that my co-founder Ryan Gielan directed on this group of teenagers with stutters, that was executively produced by Paul Rudd and Mariska Hargitay and others. It is now available on American Airlines flights as of a few days ago. So if anybody's traveling and checking out the in-flight entertainment options on American Airlines, check out My Beautiful Stutter. You can also watch it from streaming services, but there is that. And then I'll mention one other film project, since I'm highlighting films at the moment in particular. A project called Deliver Us, about the Black maternal health crisis, as has been reported in many places now for a number of years. In the United States, we have a crisis when it comes to Black maternal health care, and Black women and women of color see morbidity and mortality as it relates to childbirth at a frequency that is much, much, much higher than their white counterparts. And in some places, 8 to 10 times more likely to die in childbirth, which is just extraordinary. And Deliver Us is a documentary that centers around some of the biggest movers and shakers in Black midwifery care, and proposes that one major piece of the solution to this crisis is more support for Black midwives. It's a really compelling story. It also follows a young couple through their pregnancy, labor, and delivery process, demonstrates the importance of midwifery care in real time, and it's just been a beautiful piece to executively produce and support for the filmmakers and creatives who are leading the charge. And that project's called Deliver Us. So the Ryan White documentary, My Beautiful Stutter, now on American Airlines, and the continued progress of Deliver Us are three projects, three different healthcare communities and points of focus that are all in really exciting points of their life cycles right now.
What advice would you give to in the rare disease community who want to become advocates or storytellers in their own right?
Yeah, I speak to people who are interested in advocating within their community, using story to advocate. I speak to people about this pretty often, and a big piece of advice I have is do your homework, do your landscape assessment. Be aware if you want to advocate using storytelling for type 2 diabetes communities. Make sure you're aware of what's already happening in storytelling with respect to type 2 diabetes communities. Who's doing what? Are there ways that you could add value to something that's existing? Or is there a white space, so to speak, where you could propose something that is uniquely valuable, that you are in a uniquely interesting place to put forward? But making sure that you're aware first of what exists is a really important way of familiarizing yourself with what's happening, but also getting prepared to have credible conversations with people who could help bring your idea to life. Because if I showed up to certain pitch meetings for projects and had no clue that something I was pitching was actually happening somewhere else in the community, the potential funders I'm speaking with are much less likely to, number one, they're not going to fund my thing because it's already happening. But number two, I'm also not coming off as particularly credible. It doesn't really seem like I'm doing my homework so much as I'm there to just try to make an opportunity happen that can be all mine. So make sure you're aware of the landscape of the area that you're trying to influence before coming in too strong with the ways in which you would like to influence. And all that being said, I will also give a shout out to the power of personal storytelling when combined with credible data. Because when it comes to changing hearts and minds of policy makers, school administrators, workplace HR representatives, the various people that we have to speak to in our lives about our needs, the various places we have to advocate, changing hearts and minds, there really is nothing better than a great personal story backed up with some relevant data. So don't underestimate the power of your own story for your own advocacy needs. And then if you're looking to do more for a greater community, I'd add that part in of making sure you know what's already happening in the community before you come out with your unique idea.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Looking ahead, what are your long-term goals for for your work with Believe Limited, and your overall
long-term, I want Believe Limited to be the go-to storytelling agency for companies, organizations, and groups looking to engage with rare disease patients and caregivers. And we do that primarily through films and videos, through podcasts and live events and experiences. But there are all sorts of story-based ways to engage. And I think we do it within rare disease as well or better than anyone. I think our commitment to understanding the needs of the disease states that we work in, our commitment to producing entertainment and experiences of a high level that offer true value, our commitment to respecting the various stakeholders that make the rare disease ecosystem go. I just don't know of another agency that's doing what we're doing. And I see the impact that we have on patients, caregivers, providers, payers, policymakers. Every week, every day, I get input about how something we're doing is making a difference. So my goal is that we keep doing what we're doing for more and more and more people. And as more and more rare disease communities see therapies come online, see companies produce commercial budgets and marketing budgets that give us an opportunity to do some really interesting things with media and entertainment, that Believe Limited can continue to be part of how we collectively, as people affected by rare diseases, raise awareness, reduce stigma, and educate the general public.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to extend my heartfelt thank you to Patrick James Lynch for joining us and sharing his incredible journey and advocacy work. His dedication to the bleeding disorders community is truly inspiring, and we are grateful for the insights he's shared. If you or someone you know is struggling, please remember that help is available. You can reach out to the Suicide Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988. You are not alone, and there are people ready to listen and support you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Rare Chef, and follow the Rare Connection podcast on your favorite listening platform. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on new episodes and help us continue spreading awareness for the rare disease community. Be sure to check out our Rare Connection Facebook page and group. Finally, don't forget to visit my new website, rareconnection.org, where you can sign up for our email list, learn about our podcast and opportunities, and stay connected to with the work we're doing to support those affected by rare diseases. Thank you for being part of this important conversation, and I look forward to connecting with you again next time.